The field of biblical criticism is an especially contentious one due to the great meaning that the work has for Christians. In the earliest surviving manuscripts, there are a great number of textual variants, as well as clear evidence of later interpolations. This raises the question of what exactly Jesus said and taught and what was later ascribed to him by others who were interested in the growth of the Christian community. Another set of questions is raised by other accounts of Jesus, such as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary, that present a somewhat different picture and were excluded from the canon. For centuries, people tended to take an uncritical view of the biblical texts, which were simply taken at face value as true. But in the Enlightenment, a new spirit arose as scholars began to notice certain inconsistencies. The German scholar Hermann Samuel Reimarus worked on a major manuscript exploring what he regarded as the blatant contradictions in both the Old and the New Testament. This work was published after his death in snippets, or fragments as they were called, by the philosopher and theologian Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. These fragments caused one of the greatest controversies in the 18th century theology. One of Reimarus' key claims is that the Gospel writers' descriptions of Jesus are not straightforward accounts of actual historical facts, but instead are motivated by a strong ideological agenda. Since Jesus was executed, the promises of the Messiah redeeming the people and the imminent kingdom of heaven seem to have ended in utter and indisputable failure. Thus, the apostles were obliged to come up with a version of the story that gave this defeat a positive spin. They then proceeded to invent tall tales of miracles and the resurrection in order to support their new assertion that Jesus was a divinity, although Jesus himself never made such a claim. Reimarus argues that the apostles simply cooked up the story of Jesus rising from the dead, as can be seen from the fact that the accounts of this event are highly inconsistent. In Matthew, we read about how Mary and Mary Magdalene come to the tomb to anoint the body, only to find it sealed with a great rock. Then there is a great earthquake, and an angel comes and removes the rock. All of this frightens the guards, who run off. However, in Mark, Luke, and John, there is no account of any of this, no talk of earthquakes, angels, or terrified guards. Similarly, Reimarus claims the accounts of the ascension are dubious. Jesus is claimed to have remained with the disciples for 40 days before ascending to heaven, but remarkably, no one else saw him during this entire time. Moreover, the account of the ascension itself only appears in Mark and Luke, and is absent in Matthew and John, who simply say that Jesus mysteriously disappeared. Once again, Reimarus concludes the accounts given in Mark and Luke must be interpolations. Reimarus' work inspired other authors to look critically at the New Testament narratives. One of these was the German theologian David Friedrich Strauss, who published the work The Life of Jesus Critically Examined in 1835-36. Strauss was interested in separating the fact from fiction about the life of Jesus. He compared the Gospels with different Greek and Roman myths which were well known in antiquity. He went through the Gospels line for line and tried to determine which elements could be plausibly assumed to have happened and which ones belonged to the realm of myth. His general conclusion was that most of the Gospel accounts were unreliable since they contained a wealth of mythological elements which could only have been created by later authors with an ideological investment in promoting Christianity as a new religion. Like Reimarus' work, Strauss's The Life of Jesus was highly controversial and in the end cost him his job. These are just two of the best-known episodes in the long history of biblical criticism, but there are many similar ones that are no less interesting to explore. When we discuss the Christian religion, we're all accustomed to think in terms of some of its famous dogmas, the Incarnation, the Revelation, the Ascension, the Trinity, etc. However, the Gospels were, of course, written well before any of these dogmas were firmly established as church doctrine. Thus, one of the challenges of reading these texts is to set aside what we know about the later development of Christian doctrine and just try to focus on what is written in the works themselves. For those of us who have grown up in a Christian culture, it's easy to find things in the text which seem familiar and intuitive to us. But this often leads us to lose sight of the radicalism of Jesus' message. Here again, we need to try to set aside our own modern intuitions and understand his teachings against the background of the world in which he lived. Only in this way can we fully appreciate the revolution in human thinking that he brought about.